When Undertale came out 10 years ago, it changed my view of video games. I was a child, and this was the first time I had seen a game with such artistic vision. It was the first time I had seen a story question the meta-narrative and directly address the audience, integrating the player into the story as a character. It blew my mind. It made me truly see video games as art, and at the time, I remember a lot of people pointing to Undertale as proof that video games are a fully realised creative medium. The impact Undertale had can't be understated. Anyone who was online at the time knew about Undertale whether they wanted to or not. The music, fan games, memes, the incredibly vocal fandom were all inescapable. Today, the idea that video games are art is one that's widely accepted. It's not much of a debate anymore, and I think Undertale had an undeniable part in changing that perception. So, when Deltarune Chapter 1 released, I didn't have hopes too high, if you can believe it. I couldn't imagine it surpassing Undertale. Its predecessor was a generational masterpiece, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of game in my eyes. And Chapter 1 left me appropriately whelmed. It was a fun, cute, self-contained adventure, but it didn't try to come close to Undertale. It was a demo, of course, but I wasn't holding my breath waiting for more. How many times has a visionary creator returned to a story, delivering a sequel that just wasn't the same as the first? How many times have we seen superfluous sequels that were clearly never planned, only made as a reaction to popularity? How many times did we see creatives deliver something that just wasn't the same as their original masterpiece? Following up a 10 out of 10 seems like a doomed task. Yet, Chapter 4 surprised me because I think there is a lot of meta-commentary about trying to live up to expectations in this chapter. I think that this chapter is partially about Toby's own story of trying to make art in the face of colossal expectations. I think that this game is in part about art, and that's why I love it. While Chapter 1 didn't hook me, Chapter 2 certainly did. I loved Queen, I loved Birdley, loved Spanton and the world, and most of all Chris. The 3-year wait between Chapters 2 and 3 drove me, like most people, insane. In that waiting time, people crafted theories and made predictions endlessly, all trying to guess what would come next. Most people expected a formula to develop, based on Chapters 1 and 2. A new world each chapter, a new secret boss in the same vein as Jevil and Spanton, a drip feed of lore about the Dark Worlds and Gaster in the night, and so on. I personally imagined that each member of Chris's class would be explored in about as much depth as Birdley was, being significant for around one chapter each. And then we got this. Chapter 3 is weird. It's not what I wanted when I was first playing it, and I felt a little underwhelmed. The visuals weren't grabbing me like they were in Chapter 2, Tenna felt like a rerun of Spanton, and I wasn't a big fan of this Zelda minigame. The humour was pretty on point, and the other minigames were fun, but I wanted to immediately dig into the new lore and storylines, but Chapter 3 didn't follow Chapter 2's formula. It's a much more linear experience with a lot less exploration and a lot more of a focus on experiments and gameplay gimmicks. The story is mostly self-contained and concerned with Chris's family falling apart rather than the secrets of Noelle and Gaster in the hometown. I didn't dislike Chapter 3, but I didn't love it. Yet, having played Chapter 4, I look back on Chapter 3 with a much higher opinion. Partly because Chapter 4 was everything I wanted, the big reveals and the character arcs of the heroes and secrets being unveiled. But throughout Chapter 4 is the recurring theme of fear to trust in yourself. Susie begins to learn healing magic in Chapter 2, but it's mostly a joke until it becomes important here. Here we see her insecurity holding her back. She feels inferior as a healer to Ralsei. She feels that there is no point in doing something badly when someone else can do it so much better. She doesn't want to commit the time it takes being bad at something to reach a point where she's good at it. And Susie's not the only character with this conflict. It's implied, or at least very easily imagined, that Chris feels like an underachiever in comparison to Asriel. Their room is void of decorations and rewards, they don't perform well in school, and they've become distant from Noelle, their only friend. Asriel is always described as the golden boy, kind to everyone, gifted, academically successful. Chris is a little gremlin child, and they wait for having fun and playing pranks and spending their time studying and thinking about the future. If I was in this position as a teenager, I know I would feel intimidated by the success of my older brother. You look at all the ways someone else's success is measured compared to your own, and you feel inferior. I know that feeling all too well. Alvin too shares this fear. He idolizes his father, and feels that he can never live up to his heights as a writer. He feels that anything he wrote could never be as good as Gerson's writing, so there's no point in trying. Gerson is clearly inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien, but Alvin is no Chris. He didn't pick up the pen to finish his father's work. He leaves it alone, afraid of tarnishing a legacy. The Lord of the Hammer is a beloved work in the world of Deltarune, and Alvin doesn't think he's capable of making something as good as that. But one character stands in opposition to all of this fear. The old man, the absolute goat, the author himself, Gerson Boone, professes a really important courage. He makes Susie prove herself to claim the axe, and the first thing he tells her is that she can't run away from her fear. Literally, because he makes the soul green. Gerson is skilled enough to never take a hit from Susie, and he uses this to teach her a lesson. He forces her to depend on her own healing magic instead of using items or relying on Ralse. When she's pushed to prove her own ability to herself, she persists and eventually improves. Only by leaving her shame and her sense of inferiority behind can she learn to trust in herself. Gerson is the most accomplished and respected character we've met. His writing is legendary and his battle skills are unparalleled. Though he wants to teach people, he doesn't show them how to imitate himself. He makes them learn on their own, to develop their own ability and leave their shame behind and to prosper in their own unique way. He never finished The Lord of the Hammer. Neither did Alvin, too afraid of tarnishing the book's legacy. But Gerson doesn't care about the legacy of his book. He's glad when people reinterpret it and change it. He just wants to see people creating art because they want to. He encourages Alvin to believe in his own writing ability, not to complete his works, but to make art for the love of art. Disregard all expectations. Ignore what people want from you. Make what you want to make, and your art will be fulfilling. That's the message I took from Gerson. When you constantly compare yourself to others, when you think you're not good enough, you'll never try to succeed. You'll be stuck in a place you're not satisfied with because you're too afraid to go your own way and create your own story. Revisiting Chapter 3, I appreciated a lot more through this lens. This isn't what I had wanted from Toby. I had wanted something like Chapter 2, where I could explore a world and find secrets and connections to Undertale. What I got was a lot of minigames and a fairly small piece of backstory for Chris. I like some of the minigames, but I don't really like the mystery boards, and I really did enjoy the creepypasta secret version of those games. I found this secret boss to be frustrating, because the movement and the combat is so rigid, and I felt like I wanted more freedom to move around. But I'm glad it's in the game, because clearly Toby does enjoy these things. Clearly he wanted them to be in Deltarune. He knew what people wanted, and decided to do his own thing, and put in the minigames that he wanted to make instead. No one asked for a Guitar Hero minigame, but is anyone complaining? No, everyone loves this shit. If we had gotten 2 more chapters in the structure of Chapter 2, I would have been bored. Gerson says that the worst thing a story can be is predictable, and if I had predicted Chapter 3 of Deltarune, then I would have been disappointed. Now I can appreciate Chapter 3 as a really fun, wacky series of minigames and silly humour, and as the third part of a 7-part story. And I think that bit is important because this is 1/7 of a story, not nearly the whole thing. Toby stuffed it with all the silly things he wanted to include because it's his game and he makes it into what he wants and not what other people want. And I think that's great. The state of modern gaming is pretty dire. Originality is dead in AAA games. We have companies proudly showing off how they've jumped on a bandwagon or shat out another sequel or clinging to safe IPs and formulas. When's the last time you played a AAA game where you could see the authorial intent, where the love of the artist came through in the art? Big budget video games are relentlessly focus tested and marketed to the most people possible, with anything risky or personal shaved away to appeal to the lowest common denominator, and Toby Fox kicks this trend. Toby and his team, whose contributions I don't want to ignore, make what they want to make, and I love it. Deltarune and Undertale are massive parts of culture now, with Deltarune making its way as a high-profile Switch 2 launch title, and people buy it and love it because it's a personal, soulful game. The original is always better. It's a cliche that is true often enough to be widely believed. Under capitalism, when art becomes a product, artists become salespeople, and profits have to increase. So something reminiscent of art that we loved gets churned out, and it has to be bigger and better than the original, and it has to be more profitable. It's entirely predictable, and good stories are not predictable. That's the prophecy that I believed before I played Deltarune. So how did Toby follow up his magnum opus? Undertale was a cultural behemoth. How could Deltarune ever compare? The answer is that it's not comparable. Toby wrote an original story about original characters with entirely new, fresh themes and conflicts. The meta-story of Undertale was about how players treated NPCs in a video game. The meta-story of Deltarune is how the player treats the protagonist. The major themes of Undertale are friendship, humanity and determination, while Deltarune is about control and freedom. One of my biggest fears going into Deltarune was that it would be excessive in fan service. I didn't want all the screen time to go to Sans and Toriel and Undyne and all the characters that already had their stories told in Undertale. I wanted to focus on the original characters in the new world, and that's exactly what Toby did. The only plot-relevant Undertale characters so far are Toriel, Asgore and Gerson, and they're nowhere near main characters. Deltarune is about Chris and Susie and Ralse and Noelle and the Knight, and the Undertale characters take a backseat. It doesn't rehash the themes of Undertale, and it's not even really a sequel. Doubt, irony, that's what poisons your story. If Toby had been less sure of himself, if he had doubted his ability to make a story good enough to live up to Undertale, the easiest route would have been to return to the Undertale well. Reuse beloved characters, invent a new conflict, constantly make reference to the previous game. When an artist isn't confident, they fall back on what is popular and try to give people what they want. That's when we get brute force in art. Needing to wow people but lacking the confidence to rely on artistic ability alone, we see all the tiny details that don't matter. Video games become more and more photorealistic, to the point where we can see bubbles in beers and horse testicles that shrink in the cold. More detail is bigger, which must mean better, which must mean more money. But people want good art, not predictable art, not safe art. Toby and his team had the confidence to write an entirely new story, with entirely new characters, and have it be a follow-up to Undertale. And it paid off. Because for all my griping about Chapter 3, I honestly think that even though it isn't trying to, Deltarune surpasses Undertale. Looking back at Undertale, it's kind of hard for me to appreciate it the same way I did the first time, when it was all entirely new to me. This game hasn't aged poorly, not in the slightest. The story is still perfectly realised. But one thing really stood out to me as I was playing Chapter 4 of Deltarune, which is just how beautiful it is all the time. I've seen the most realistic graphics money can make, but none of them make as much of an impression on me as the simple blue light of the church world. I love finding a prophecy panel because the lighting is just so gorgeous to look at. The background is so arcane, and the world being made of studies and libraries and scholars makes such a powerfully moody, thoughtful atmosphere. And of course the music is incredible. I feel like that doesn't need to be said, this is Toby Fox we're talking about. The fights still feel fresh thanks to the party mechanics rather than controlling only one character, and there are always new gimmicks being thrown at you. There is really no fight that feels like it just came straight from Undertale or was modified from an already existing fight. And the enemy designs are consistently unique and interesting. When you want to create something, it's so easy to be intimidated by all the art that already exists. For something to be commercially viable, it needs to appeal to the masses and have an identity that can easily be slipped into a category so someone can know exactly what they're buying when they buy it. It has to be perfect, it has to stand out, it has to break records and be groundbreaking. This is what so many perfectionists think, and it's what stops so many people from picking up the pen for themselves. But nah, fuck that. Good art is made by people who want to make good art, not people who want to make money. So disregard the idea of making your art profitable and living up to a legacy. Let go of your shame of being bad at something when you start, because everyone is bad at the start. Trust in yourself to know what you like, and then make something that you truly like. Maybe others will like it, maybe not. It doesn't matter. Just pick up the pen and pour your heart out onto the page.